I'm such a fan of how philosophical and deep thinking this series is. There are so many peculiar thoughts about life, legacy, and reality.
I love
So
it.
in adapting this with your creative team, what would you say most stretched your intellect? Was there a nugget of wisdom, a theme, or something that most consumed your thoughts when doing this?
I mean, look, adapting this show has been an enormous undertaking, and there are many days when I questioned, whether or not it was worth it or whether or not I should be doing it. But one of the great joys of the show is that I have a lot of peculiar interests,
Mhm.
and when we get to indulge in various flights of fancy and conversations that I find interesting. So I'm interested in questions of predestiny and determinism, and whether or not AIs have a moral code that maps over humans, and whether or not clones have agency, and all of those things. And so I love that we get to, I mean, we do some crazy things and there's a lot of spectacle in the show, but I think we get pretty deep and pretty heavy sometimes, and into some pretty intense stuff in a way that very few shows actually do.
Yeah, just watching it, my wife's really into sci-fi and fantasy book series, and I was describing everything to her, and I was like, I could sit there for hours, just keep going. Like, there's so many layers to it. So when you're having casual conversations with people who may have an interest in this, you're most eager to talk about what?
Well, what I'm trying to do, because I'm aware that for the show to work, it has to appeal to a broad audience. So
Right.
by design, there were some elements that we changed to make the access point a little easier for newcomers. It's got to be emotional. It has to feel universal. And I'm hoping it's like kind of a spoonful of sugar situation where you can
Right.
hook them with some of these big, flashy, effect sequences and action sequences and things like that. Day's naked fight in the first episode, and then we can kind of trick them into going, more intense and more in depth and hopefully more emotional, and break some hearts. And I think there was a perception with season one that the show was really beautiful, but maybe a little too cerebral for some people.
Mm.
And I wanted to keep the cerebral aspect, but also really broaden our audience, and tell people that this is a big tent kind of show.
Right, right. So you and your creative team do such an incredible job at making this show feel so immersive, from the language of the characters to the VFX department to the production designers. It seems as though there are thousands of artists that are spending thousands of
There
hours
are, there are.
making every frame feel like the real thing. Sometimes these things can only be on there for like a second before
Yeah.
they're gone, never to be seen again. Can you talk about the struggle as a creator, as well as maybe for the DPs who are capturing this, to see all this gorgeous design and not feel the impulse to ling longer on whatever that is than what's necessary to the story?
Yeah, I mean, look, it's one of the things we ask of our team is to just give it that sense of verisimilitude and that sense of fidelity, and make all the props and the set design as sort of intricate and detailed as humanly possible. And often, particularly when I'm directing and I'm on a set, I'll notice something that I hadn't noticed before, and I'll say, "Oh, we should really get a shot of that." And sometimes that motivates a shot that you would not have thought of otherwise, and sometimes it makes it into the cut, and sometimes it doesn't. But that's their job. Their job is to create a kind of holographic three-dimensional world, and no matter which direction you point the camera, it's going to seem completely real. And everyone that works on the show is really passionate about what they do. And I love it when I'm expecting a costume and there's a little detail trim or something in the embroidery that I didn't notice before, and that aspect of it just brings me a lot of joy.
Yeah, yeah. By the way, I love when the narration comes in, especially at the start of this new season, because it leaves you with something to stew on.
Yeah.
In this case, it's about how anybody can. There was one thought I latched on to in particular, and it's about how anybody can be a success, but it takes a mad person to be great. So
Yeah.
I'm curious to know your thoughts about that as a creator. Do you think that
Is
statement.
autobiographical.
Well, I'm not saying you're a mad person, but your stuff is great.
Yeah. Yeah, I believe in that a little bit. I mean, look, if I look at the people that I admire throughout history, whether they be, writers or filmmakers or artists or sculptors, almost every person I admire was a bit of an outlier or was considered stubborn or quirky or went against the grain. And I think that's why those artistic pieces kind of rise to the surface and people realize there's something different about them because they dared to look at the world in a different way. So I do think there's something to that. I don't think it means everyone has to be schizophrenic or, on the spectrum, but I do think to create true art, you have to be a bit of an outlier. You have to be opinionated. You have to be a little bit uncompromising.
Yeah. So I have to ask about this concept of Harry Seldon this particular season, this idea of someone's consciousness living on. And so assuming that somebody from the past was completely willing to be part of this, is there anybody's consciousness that you would be most eager to continue on and see how they adapt to the changes of the world, whether it's like Shakespeare or some great inventor or an artist or something like that?
I would love it if a version of Carl Sagan was still with us.
Yeah.
He happens to be my wife's, or was my wife's, godfather. I mean, that's certainly a voice that I wish the world still had access to today.
Yeah. And I know we're just about at time, and I wanted to close out by bringing up this great scene that happens fairly early on involving Harry tapping into his memories as a child. He discovers something there, a statement perhaps, that may help him with something that he's dealing with in the present. Have you given much thought to patterns and how our past may be feeding us information that may come in handy down the line? And do you have any particular statements, whether spoken by a relative of yours or something that you read that may have been surprisingly helpful to you in a time of need?
I mean, I think that's a really wonderful question. I think that for better or worse, we tend to carry both our parents and our grandparents with us. I mean, generally, I think each person largely tends to be influenced by, the prior two generations. All the good stuff and all the bad stuff, and I think if we examine ourselves and we examine why the way we are and we trace back, our parents' actions and our grandparents' actions, I can see, a lot of us can see why we are on the path we are today. And once we understand that and liberate ourselves from that, then we can chart our own path. And that's where things get really exciting. But I think that Harry had some revelations when he was reflecting back on his past, and we'll see more of those revelations playing out as this season continues and hopefully on into future seasons.